In October of 2020, 3 podcasters disappeared while recording an episode. A year later, their audio was found.
Welcome to Mind Over Splatter. This is a podcast about horror movies. We're doing a show today on found footage movies from 1998 to 2008, and it's going to be a found audio.
I
podcast.
was curious what was happening. I think we need to redo this because your sound is real fucking wonky.
No, I thought we'd do the whole thing as found audio. It's just we'll just all shake our mics around all the time.
Yeah.
Hey, I already have the shakes from being so hungover, so I'm good.
There you go. See, you're all ready to go.
How do you cut on a whip pan in audio?
I don't know. We just got to talk like that.
We'll work it
out. Okay, no, that's terrible. I already hate this. Never mind.
Okay, we can edit.
Let's
out,
restart.
Bit canceled.
Welcome to Mind Over Splatter. It's a podcast about horror movies. And tonight we are doing found footage movies, specifically more or less 1998 to 2008.
Why did we agree on this era?
Why did we agree? I
guess we didn't agree.
Why was it enforced upon you? My idea was to go from Blair Witch until Cloverfield. So to kind of go from the start of the found footage boom until the point where it's become a recognized genre enough that you could have like a big budget found footage movie, but kind of before they become totally cookie cutter, maybe.
See, there's a cardinal sin right there of found footage movies. Big budget, Cloverfield. You don't need that. It destroyed found footage.
Well, possibly, yes. And I will be happy to reopen this conversation in a couple hours or whatever when we get there. So let's build our way up to it.
A couple hours? I'm going to be asleep by then.
So I'm Dylan. I'm in Montreal. I'm getting revved up tonight. I cracked open.
No!
Yeah. I got some
rev. Are you serious? You got some revs?
I got some rev. Yeah, ever since I rediscovered them. Are there more than one flavor?
When I lived in Ontario, there was a red one and a blue one.
Okay, I've only seen the blue one. That was the one that I have memories of drinking from like 2000, as we discussed on the Hellraiser podcast. And
so now we're just doing a podcast on Rev now. We should just do that.
I think season 3 will be on Rev.
Okay, good.
As you could hear, Sheldon is back with us. Hi, Sheldon.
Oh, I'm back, yeah. I missed the last one. I don't know where the fuck I was, but I have a bush open, but I'm going to go to a Torque Amber Ale called Whoa Nelly.
And Sean O'Rourke is back with us. Hey, Sean.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm not drinking anything special.
Also, later on, I'll be patching in an interview with Professor Margarida Medeiros, an expert on Victorian ghost photography. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about found footage. You could say that most of the history of filmmaking has been oriented towards like trying to immerse the audience in a world by making like the cameras and the editing as invisible as possible, so you ignore the medium entirely. But there's been an alternate history that takes a different approach. In the 1920s, the Soviet filmmaker Dziga Vertov promoted a documentary style he called Kino Pravda, or film truth, that drew attention to the camera's eye and the contrast created by editing. And that was an inspiration for the cinema verite movement in the early 1960s.
And we have him today, right?
And we have Dziga right here with us. Yeah. He is 128 years old. And sorry, we had to cancel him because he's Russian, actually. We weren't allowed to have him on the show.
We boycotted him.
Yeah, we had to boycott
Fuck
Dziga.
that guy.
The cinema verite movement of the early 1960s was inspired by that, and they also sought to record reality directly and make like direct documentaries that deliberately involved the filmmakers and their cameras in what they recorded. And then fiction filmmakers in the 60s incorporated a lot of the same techniques, including the filmmakers of the French New Wave and like John Cassavetes in America, who also made sort of documentary-ish fiction films that had unsteady handheld cameras and often had brusque, deliberate editing choices. So they'd kind of realized that you can create a greater sense of immediacy if, instead of disguising the medium, you call attention to its presence. And the audience's awareness of the form and the technique can draw them into the material, into an identification of the person holding the camera. So almost paradoxically, reminding the audience that they're watching a movie can make it feel more like real life. The first found footage movie, as we use the term today, was probably The Connection from 1961, which is by the American experimental filmmaker Shirley Clark. And that was a fiction that pretended to be recovered footage of a group of heroin addicts and jazz musicians shot by a fictional documentarian. Though, of course, found footage as a technique didn't really become a genre until it was adopted by horror movies. So we know what the first found footage horror movie is, right?
Cannibal Holocaust? Like 1980?
Yeah, 1980, Cannibal Holocaust, the notoriously nasty Italian provocation that was so upsettingly real to audiences at the time. The cast famously had to be trotted out in front of an Italian court to prove that they hadn't actually died.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
And for me, that's probably my favorite found footage horror movie.
I'm definitely eager to go to bat for Cannibal Holocaust. As disturbing as it is, and not for everybody, the way that it manipulates the audience's sympathies is, I think, incredibly elite.
The copy I have, you can watch it without the animal brutality or whatever you want it.
Yeah, murder.
There's an option. There's the unrated version with all that stuff, or the one that kind of excludes it.
That's nice. It is very disturbing, and understandably for a lot of people, that's something they should stay away from. But that's nice to know that they edited a way that I feel like that's a decent choice to make.
You see the poor turtle getting...
Yeah.
That's the one that sticks with me all these
Me
years
too.
later, actually.
I love turtles.
Me too. A lot of movies imitated the material of Cannibal Holocaust, but in terms of the technique, obviously that found footage boom that we're going to be talking about starts with the Blair Witch Project in 1999, and
ends with the Blair Witch Project.
And we're going to dig deep into that. But what you might not know, and what I didn't really know actually until we started getting into this, is that there were a couple found footage movies trickling out in 1998, actually ahead of Blair Witch.
Like right before.
There were a couple foreshocks. Yeah.
They came out in the same year, like Last Broadcast, the Alien one. I'm just trying to think of how Blair Witch came to be with those movies being out just a little bit earlier. Like, did Blair Witch, did they see this and then make it? Or
No.
did they come out?
No, the timelines really make it clear that Blair Witch couldn't have been influenced by them.
Okay.
Even though, like, with the Last Broadcast in particular, which is eerily similar to the Blair Witch in a lot of ways. Like, it's also a documentary crew that goes out into the forest in search of a mythical being. It's the Jersey Devil in the Last Broadcast. It's very similar in the subject matter, and that has created there's a very popular misconception that the Blair Witch ripped off the Last Broadcast.
Mm-hmm. When you Google it, that's what happens. You see
exactly. It says that all over the internet,
Yeah.
but the timelines don't work out. Blair Witch was completely shot in October of 1997. The Last Broadcast comes out in October of 98, fully a year after Blair Witch had already been shot.
You had this all lined up, eh?
Yeah, man, I did my homework.
See, I knew you would. That's why I didn't bother Googling it. I was like, hey, you know what? Dylan's going to inform me on all this.
Yeah, it's nice to just know that you're going to get all the info you need. You can sit back and relax.
So there was no direct influence. Still, it's kind of remarkable that there seems to have been that kind of cultural current or whatever, that these similar movies do start burbling up in 98.
Like Deep Impact and Armageddon.
Yeah, exactly. Or Bugs and Ants. Bugs Life or whatever it was
all
called.
late 90s things.
Yeah. So, in addition to the Last Broadcast, there was also Alien Abduction, Incident in Lake County. Technically a remake of one of the rare found footage movies that exists in that gap between Cannibal Holocaust and the Blair Witch Project, because it was originally the McPherson tapes, right? And that was a real no-budget movie. Dean Aliotto was the guy who made the McPherson tapes, and he was invited by the United Paramount Network, UPN television station, to make a slightly bigger budget version of it in 98, and that's what became Alien Abduction, Incident in Lake County.
A relatively bigger budget.
Yeah, that's all relative for sure.
I think at the end of this podcast, you should lay out I'm sure you know, the budget for each one of these films. And then we can rank them side by side in connection with their budgets.
Adjust everything for inflation.
See if a higher budget means better, which it obviously doesn't.
In some ways, it gets complicated, though, because some of these movies, which we'll probably discuss, had reshoots done, and the reshoots often ended up being way more expensive than the original shoot.
I have a point on that for one of them.
Yeah.
Oh.
Or like marketing budgets that are 10 times what the shooting budget was, which makes it look more expensive.
Sheldon, what's going on in Alien Abduction?
This is a very low budget movie, it seems. Basically about a family witnessing aliens. I think they were doing work on a cow or something.
Yeah, doing something to a cow.
The family interrupted it, and then just basically them in their house trying to defend themselves against the aliens. And so here's the rules for me for found footage, which you have to follow these rules to make it a good movie. You can't have CGI, because right there you know it's not real. Like, these movies they're made to be like ultra realism, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're meant to make you believe it's a real tape. So the second you see CGI, it broke the rule. 2, the acting has to be good. It has to look real. In most of these movies, there's someone holding a camera. The person holding the camera, filming, they should be doing things that a normal person would do with this camera.
Yeah, it shouldn't look like
Yeah.
a cinematographer's in control.
Yeah, now in this movie, the acting is atrocious. The person filming in this particular movie, he just didn't act right. No one would act that way with a camera during an alien invasion. At some point, he would have dropped the camera and he would have got the fuck out of there. He wouldn't be zooming in on his family members trying to get their reaction towards, an alien invasion. Actually, and the aliens in this movie looked pretty decent. The ship looked pretty cool. I thought it looked believable, but everything else it just didn't follow. It didn't look good. The acting was bad. Now, having said all that, I fucking love this movie. It is hilariously bad, and it makes it so good.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of corniness in the movie, but there's kind of a sweetness that comes with that too. There's something almost endearing about the corniness in the film.
Yeah, it felt like community theater vibes in a not mean way when I was watching it.
There's a bit of Spielberg in this movie's DNA too, I think.
Sure.
In like the sweetness and also like the family union that when they get split up, there's then weirdness and fear starts seeping in and into their suburban home and stuff.
Yeah. I think for me, the movie is just a little clunky. There's a bunch of these talking head interviews that seem inserted almost like after the fact as post-production if just the videotape doesn't work on its own.
Also, like half the dialogue is characters just shushing each other. Characters are constantly going,
yeah. And that's the most believable part of it, though, because any dialogue they had, you could tell it was fake. It was
a good deal of censored swearing, which that's probably the thing that made me feel like I was watching an episode of Cops or something.
You mentioned it earlier. What was this aired on? CBS or
UPN?
UPN,
which is a station that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah,
I don't know too much about American TV, but
they used to have WWF when it was still that, very briefly.
Apparently, people believe this was real when it aired on TV.
Yeah,
they positioned this movie like in a block between two separate actual documentaries.
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
Yeah, or it followed up on a show that was like Real Vampires Exposed. That was about which was about deconstructing the myths around vampires. Like it was a documentary, and they followed it up with this.
So I guess it made people believe it was real. Like when Discovery Channel released their mermaid show, if you guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Because they put it in there, and they made it look real, and people were actually really upset that.
Well, it's War of the Worlds.
When they found out it was fake.
Yeah, like Sean said, War of the Worlds is like the case study for that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
The
like
radio program.
When was that released?
Like 38, 30s? I want to say. When Orson Welles did a broadcast of the Mercury Theater doing War of the Worlds in the style of
I'm assuming
news
that's
report.
what they try to do here.
Yeah, I don't know if it was intentional or not. Probably. Like they put no disclaimers on it, right?
There's no writing at the end. I don't think I watched.
There is end credits that actually identify the actors, so anybody who stayed to the end could see that there are actors playing these characters with different names.
I was gonna say something earlier, like how they act, how they respond to an alien, where they're like, "No, you're lying. Let's all have dinner." It's like, what? No one would react this way. Like,
well, but the mom's an alcoholic.
That's true.
That wouldn't happen. We would go outside and look, or we would look at the tape you just filmed and watch it.
Yeah.
They do look at the tape.
Well, later, after they already started having dinner.
Don't they start checking the tape? I might get the order of events wrong, but like after they start getting somehow targeted by the aliens.
Yeah, it was like an hour
after they
into
start
the
getting like Havana syndromed by the aliens.
If you're talking about rules of found footage, I think is a good thing to get into.
Those are my two. Just no CGI. It has to look real, believable.
You have to be both, like, the performances have to be both good and bad, kind of. Like,
there should be no script.
You can't be chewing scenery.
If I was filming a found footage movie, there wouldn't be a script. You'd have to just talk.
That's the case for most of these. In fact, pretty much every one we're going to talk about, except for maybe one or two, are unscripted or like largely unscripted.
Yeah. So it becomes
makes it more believable.
There's a balancing act between what comes off as believable on a camera and like what's craft and what's like just the camera catching something that feels like real life.
I think that like found footage is an interesting gimmick because it gives you those kind of neat technical challenges, like blocking out long take scenes like that and how you're going to make it look natural or found. But my big rules are like, I want like logical consistency. Who is shooting the footage and how did it come to be found and by whom? And then like also, and you've addressed this with this one, why after a certain point, why are you still filming?
It's a really fun movie, so people should watch it. But this is a blueprint of how not to do a found footage.
Actually, I think their excuse for this one is the kid wants to be a music video director, which I don't mind as an excuse for why he's obsessed with looking through the camera.
Yeah, I understood that he's like a teenager who's in his camera phase, who's like obsessed
Yeah,
with
he's like a
filming
little
things.
Spike Jones.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
in the late 90s, if you had a camera, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
if I had one, I'd be filming everything.
If this is your first camera,
Back then,
Yeah, that's
if you
the
had
thing,
one,
right? Having a camera was a lot more novel for most of this chunk of time that we're talking about today,
Yeah.
right?
I just wanted to go back to like the reaction to the movie, because I just wanted to say that part of why there was a reaction to the movie at all and why people were speculating about it was because like these found footage movies start appearing at the same time that like internet discourse starts appearing.
Mhm.
There was a lot of debate about this movie that was happening on like message boards and stuff because
yeah, that's the other thing with these, which is why these newer ones, they don't appeal to me because, like, you can just Google it. Like, when this one came out, the alien abduction movie we're talking about, you couldn't just Google it and be like, okay, let's see what this movie's about.
yeah, you could ask Jeeves it, but you might get a message board where everybody's convinced it's real. And the thing that happened with the discourse around alien abduction was that people started talking about it as a real thing, and then other people started correcting them, like, no, there's actors. Look, this one actor was in another project. But then they discovered that it was based on the McPherson tape, which was the 89 movie, the no-budget movie the same filmmaker made.
Oh, I didn't know it was that much older.
Yeah, 9 years between them. But a lot of people mistook the original McPherson tape for an actual document. And they were like,
Right.
okay, this is fake, but it's a recreation of a real thing.
Yeah, so that's the conspiracy, I think. They redid it to, like, poke fun at the original.
Yeah, and some people were promoting the conspiracy that they were trying to defuse
Mm-hmm.
this leaked original tape by creating a fake version of it that would stand in for the real thing.
Yeah.
So you could see how like these messages boards would start running with this and getting all twisted up in conspiracy theories.
If we chose to do a different era with the found footage, I was going to make you guys watch the Alien Autopsy.
Oh, hell yeah. Well, that'd be right around this time, right? Like,
Because that was 95, I think.
okay. But very like 90s X-Files alien obsession.
Yeah, I think that was aired in like 95 on CBS or
I thought it was
TSN
Fox.
or like what, Fox? Like it was.
Was it like a Jonathan Frakes on Fox deal?
Fox would make sense because Fox also did X-Files, right?
Yeah, and very sensationalist and like, vertical integration, tie in my media empire.
So I really wanted to get into Alien Autopsy because there's no faces shown. They're all in masks,
They're dressed like stagehands.
so you can't see any actors. There's no end credits. There's nothing. It just starts as a found footage movie. We still have that where it's like, I don't know if this is fake or real, right? Like, we don't know about that movie or clip. And that's the fun thing about these movies, or used to be.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
I think people still debate it on YouTube and Reddit or whatever, but you've seen it, right, Dylan?
You know what? Now that you mentioned it, I have. But when I was young, I think I actually like rented it on VHS, or like they had the VHS in my library or something. And I was also like, is this real? I think
Alien Autopsy.
correct me if I'm
fact or
wrong, but I think
fiction.
don't they like trot out Stan Winston at one point, and he's like, if this person is a special effects artist, he should be in Hollywood because I've never seen special effects as good if that is actual special
we've seen
effects.
that, so we've seen that in the.
Yeah,
oh,
that's
no,
lifted
you're
right
breaking
from
my,
Lake
you're breaking
County.
my bubble. They put that in there because. Oh no, Dylan! Why? It's fake. It's so fake.
So what you're referencing, surely, is that in Alien Abduction,
No.
they trot out somebody who
Fuck.
who says something like that, right?
He has 20 years in the sci-fi horror film genre or something. He says, right?
Yeah.
So he would know.
You destroyed my life right there. I'm connecting the dots and fuck, Jonathan Frakes, you lied to me, didn't you? You piece of shit.
It's a total fabrication. It never happened. It never happened.
I am interested in broaching right now, though, before we move on, like, why do we have found footage horror movies emerging at this time? I think it's kind of neat that they kind of emerge in parallel with like reality TV. and also like mumblecore movies for people who are into that, which are all forms that use like handheld cameras and kind of a blurring of the lines between like what's staged and what's something you just caught with a camera, and why there would be a sudden appetite or need for pseudo-authentic formal elements and documentary techniques and aesthetics that start happening around the late 90s and then take off in the early 2000s. What do you think, Sean?
Well, I guess with reality TV, it's easy to just be like, oh, writer's strike. But,
Right.
But I don't know, it might just be like a result of early internet and like hyper media conscious point in society where we're like, trending toward viewing ourselves as like media objects, or like instead of like the temporary embarrassed millionaires, like temporarily disgraced celebrities.
Yeah.
So maybe there's more of an appetite for like that small story thing. That's more about like the success of the movies. I'm not sure about the appetite.
Yeah. I wonder if it's just like a fatigue or like a breaking point had been reached with like postmodernism and irony.
Yeah.
If it's just kind of the new sincerity thing where people were just so fatigued with things like that were self-referential, which the 90s was so saturated with.
That's a good point.
What other movies came out in 1998?
Armageddon and Deep Impact.
Oh, really?
Phantom Menace. That's 99.
That's 99. In terms of 99, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of them, but I'd like to get on to Blair Witch before I do that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's move on to Blair Witch.
Let's do that, yeah?
Yeah.
Let's press ahead to the big one.
That's why we're here.
The main
event.
What people think is the OG of found footage.
Yeah, this small independent movie with little budget that came out of nowhere at the turn of the millennium and revolutionized film history. My Big Fat Greek Wedding was considered.
Jesus Christ!
All right, let's talk about Blair Witch a little bit.
No, I'm curious about the Greek thing.
I'm not.
Me neither.
Let's skate past that joke. So Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez met when they were both enrolled in the film program at the University of Central Florida, Orlando, in the early 90s. And Myrick was a Florida native, and after he graduated, he supported himself with different editing and cinematography gigs. Sanchez was born in Cuba, and he had gone through high school and college in Maryland before moving to Orlando for that program. And after graduation, he'd been making in-house videos for the Planet Hollywood restaurant chain.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a pretty sweet gig, actually. One thing that Myrick and Sanchez bonded over in the University of Central Florida was their love of the mystery documentary series In Search Of. Do you guys know the series?
Was that the Nimoy one?
Yeah, that's the one hosted by Leonard Nimoy, usually wearing like a turtleneck and a blazer.
I've seen
sometimes mustachioed.
Ooh, I've seen a little bit of it, but mostly I know it through the Simpsons parody in the Monorail episode, and or the Mr. Burns, whatever one he's in.
You know, I started watching it this week. I'd never seen it before, and yeah, I was definitely like, I get that reference all of a sudden. I did not know what that was before. So this was a series that ran from 76 to 82. It was like a syndicated series that was like investigating mysterious phenomena, like Bigfoot, aliens, the Mary Celeste,
DB Cooper.
Whatever. There's probably a DB Cooper in there that I would imagine. Some of it was like ancient alien stuff. Like it did kind of come from the Chariots of the Gods. It was like inspired by the Chariots of the Gods documentary. Chariots of the Gods being the book by Eric von Daniken, which really kickstarted that whole thing where you point at everything neat from the ancient world and say aliens did it. Like Unsolved Mysteries is maybe something you could draw a line to. From that to this,
Unsolved Mysteries, I love.
I love Unsolved Mysteries. I remember watching that like as a kid. Like if my parents would go shopping in the evening, I'd putting that on and creeping myself out. And it sounds like Myrick and Sanchez kind of were the same way with In Search Of. Like they both remembered watching this as kids and remembered loving it, and they bonded over how like they would creep themselves out watching the show because, you know, you watch this documentary about unexplained events and suddenly you don't know how much of this is real, how much of this is fake. You're getting spooked out. And both of these guys, like a lot of people in the 1990s, thought that the horror movies being made in their day were not good, were not scary. And they thought they saw a way to kind of incorporate something that they felt from In Search Of into a new way to make a horror movie that would actually be scary.
I fucking love In Search Of.
You're a big fan?
So I I didn't realize I had my mic muted for the last like 10 minutes.
Okay,
And
that's why you're
I
just
was-
chiming in now. I was like,
I was
why did you say so
I was
earlier?
actually upset that no one was responding to my comments. I was like, fuck, I love that show. They look for Loch Ness and Bigfoot and this and that. And then you just keep on talking like I wasn't even part of this. I was like,
Yeah, we heard
the fuck
nothing.
is Dylan from?
Oh, this found footage
Yeah.
podcast is spooky.
I muted to eat a chip and now I just realized. I was like, fuck.
No,
Also,
it's very much
I
like it.
as you were talking about Unsolved Mysteries, I yelled, that's the greatest theme song of all time. And you just kept on going. I was like, how did no one
you're right,
respond
though.
to that?
The theme song for In Search of is pretty decent too, actually.
I
It's
actually
pretty
don't
fun.
remember that one.
It's the Bilbo Baggins song that Nimoy did.
Hmm.
Lost civilizations, extraterrestrials, myths and monsters, missing persons, magic and witchcraft, unexplained phenomena.
Yeah, anyways, I love it. That TV show. Oh man, it's so good.
I'd never seen it before. I literally was when I was reading about Mayork and Sanchez, I thought I'd queue it up on YouTube. Maybe I'll watch the first half, see what it's about. Ended up watching 5 in
Which
a
one
row.
did you watch? Or which ones did you watch?
I'm gonna binge that and make a note.
The first one I did was, I think, Mystery Point, which is a good one on YouTube because it has all the original commercials in it, which most of the ones on YouTube don't. It's always better. to
I
have the original
love when I
commercials, yeah.
watch
Are
like
they
an
regional?
old show and they have like old Pepsi commercials and Coke commercials
Oh,
and stuff.
yeah.
No, the fucking best is when you get like some northern Massachusetts affiliate from the late 70s and you get to see like all the regional restaurant ads and stuff.
That's fun too. Or like old promos for like presidency stuff like that.
Nixon now, hold together. Yeah, hell yeah.
Anyways, yeah, continue on with your
So
Blair
these
Witch
guys
thing.
had been starting to plan this horror project as far back as 1993 when they were still in school together in Orlando. But to understand how the project even got off the ground in the first place, we kind of need to dip our toes a little bit into the American independent film renaissance of the 1990s. So, like, especially after the aftermath of the 1992 Sundance Film Festival, this was all coming from Sundance, right? The independent filmmakers were blowing up. Hollywood was feeding off the movement's energy, and studios and distributors were descending on Sundance every year to try to snap up all these titles in case they might become a surprise hit. Everybody wanted the next.
So how does this work? I'm just curious. They release movies and they air them at Sundance to a
Mhm.
select group,
Yeah,
and then from there, like Columbia or whatever buys them.
exactly. Yeah. So the
Okay.
independent people who produce the movie, if they get their movie screened at Sundance, then representatives of all the different distributors and studios and agencies will be in those screenings. And if they really like the movie and they think it has potential to be a hit, they'll try to buy it off of the people who produced it initially. One of the figures who was very important in the indie film revival of the 1990s was John Pearson. John Pearson had produced the first films of Spike Lee, Richard Linklater, Michael Moore, and Kevin Smith. And starting in 1997, Pearson also produced and hosted a show on IFC called Split Screen, which was like interviews and video essays about American indie film. Pearson had become aware of Daniel Myrick thanks to some promo videos that Myrick had made for the Florida Film Festival of 1997. So Myrick and Sanchez had made an 8-minute fake documentary that was a kind of a sort of promo for the Blair Witch Project. A little documentary about the Blair Witch invented phenomenon that they had made as something that they could show to potential investors to try to get them interested in their idea. And John Pearson decided to show this 8-minute short fake documentary on Split Screen on his IFC show. So that attracted a lot more attention. And suddenly Myrick and Sanchez are being invited to meet with investors to talk about this movie. And they had already started blurring fact and fiction at this point. Like when they talked to investors, they refused to confirm that it was fake. Like they were already at this point kind of trying to
Nice.
bluff that this was like a real footage that they had, even though they were trying to get funding to make a movie. And so, of course, they got the budget they needed, and it helped that that wasn't very much. A selling point that they emphasized to investors was that their movie wouldn't cost much more than a new car. Myrick and Sanchez had also hooked up with a producer named Greg Hale, who was another graduate of the University of Central Florida's film program. And Hale was an Alabamian who'd served 4 years in the U.S. Army, And he'd gone through the SEER training program. It's the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape program, which is kind of a notorious training program. You sometimes see it referenced in movies. Like the Card Counter recently talked about SEER and its like connection to the torture programs that the US had in like Abu Ghraib and stuff. It's a notoriously hardcore training program that's supposed to make soldiers resistant to like deprivation and torture and stuff.
Right.
Hale convinced Myrick and Sanchez to let him use his memories of the SEER program to kind of devise a way to conduct the shoot that would be intentionally difficult for the cast to try to create like more authentic emotions. So the cast, 3 people who'd been chosen from auditions, were sent out into the woods of Maryland with their own cameras, and they had GPS systems that sent them from one point to the next. And when they got there, with the filmmakers following behind at a distance, they would find some food and instructions of like the general idea of what they wanted to do. And the filmmakers would do shit during the night to keep them awake. And they also steadily reduced their rations to make them hungrier as they went on, to try to create a more real sense of desperation or confusion.
Like a Guantanamo meets Kubrick thing.
After shooting in the woods around Maryland for 8 days, in October of 97, they ended up with 20 hours of footage shot largely by the cast members themselves, which was what they needed to edit down into what became the Blair Witch Project. So Blair Witch played at Sundance in January of 1999. It debuted with a midnight screening that left the audience shocked. And it became the first film picked up at that year's Sundance Festival. Artisan Entertainment swooped in and grabbed it for $1 million.
Do you know any other movies from that year?
That played at Sundance, or that...
But what was like the other movies there?
One second. Let me see if I can find what happened. Sundance, 1999. We're a little bit past peak Sundance at this point, I would say, because peak Sundance would be more like mid-90s. But I can see here, American movie, Go, the Sarah Polley movie.
Oh, yeah.
That's all right. What else do we have here? Twin Falls, Idaho, which is a movie that I mentioned in the Hellraiser podcast because it was directed by the guys who played the twins in Hellraiser 4.
Whoa!
Really?
Those poor guys.
Yep.
I still feel bad for them.
Genghis Blues was in 99.
Oh, I don't know that.
That's a documentary about like Tuvan throat singers, I think.
So, yeah, Blair Witch was originally released in theaters in July in 27 theaters in the US. But like zooming out from the Sundance Film Festival, have you guys heard this theory that 1999 is the greatest year for American movies ever?
I have not. I would love to hear about it.
I have never heard. I don't think 90s.
I'm rattling my brain right now for a 1999 film.
Well, I'll give you some.
Okay.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
The Matrix,
Oh, yeah.
being John
Okay.
Malkovich,
The first Matrix?
Fight Club, the first one, yeah. American Beauty, Eyes Wide Shut,
I've
Three
never seen
Kings,
these.
Magnolia, The
Oh,
Talented
Big Daddy!
Mr. Ripley. Big Daddy. It is,
Oh,
is
the
there.
talented Mr. Ripley, sure. That's a pretty stacked cast.
It's a pretty good
of
list. Yeah, it
movies.
could go on. Virgin Suicides, Election.
Deuce Bigelow, Male Gigolo. I can't believe I've never seen Eyes Wide Shut because I'm pretty
It's
much in love
great.
with Tom Cruise.
Eyes Wide Shut is terrific.
It's my favorite Kubrick. I think it's a
It has-
masterpiece. Yeah.
One of my favorite on-screen depictions of marijuana, like in film history, when he says this pot is making you aggressive to Nicole Kidman.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
It's so good.
It's great line reading, too. when he
Yeah,
does it.
he's terrific. Tom Cruise was crushing it in 99. You said Magnolia too, right?
Yeah, Magnolia,
Yeah.
too.
Cool.
See, Deep Blue Sea right there wrecked 1999.
Okay, so a lot of good movies, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is surely due to the lingering effects of the indie film renaissance that I mentioned earlier, which had been gaining momentum throughout the decade. But also, I think the theater ecosystem of the 90s is worth considering as having played a role in this as well. By the end of the 90s, we'd reached the peak multiplex era.
Yeah.
These giant multiplexes with, 16 screens or 20 screens or 24 screens. There'd been more and more of those being built throughout the 1990s. And by the time we get to the end of the 90s, like not only every city, but so many like small towns really have multiplexes in their suburbs or outskirts. Because of this multiplex boom and also the mass die-off of like single screen downtown theaters, which were the casualty of this, the result was that throughout the 90s, the number of movie theaters was decreasing, but the number of available screens was increasing. And the main selling point of the multiplexes in the 90s was that they could offer choice. You could have a dozen or more different movies all playing at the same time.
Yeah, in the 90s, they offered
Exactly.
a lot of choice.
Yeah. So they needed a lot of different movies to reap the benefits of all these screens. That was the thinking at the time. The theater chains wanted all kinds of different movies so you could tempt people in with being able to see all these different things. So by the end of the 90s, suddenly we've got something like Being John Malkovich playing on an AMC screen with stadium seating and surround sound in a small town in Montana or whatever, right?
That sounds terrific.
It does sound terrific. And obviously this wasn't all good because of all those downtown theaters closing, which were often the only places where like foreign films are being showed and stuff. But the upshot at that period was that there was this need on behalf of the distributors and on behalf of the theater chains to have lots of different stuff that they could just throw on those screens.
There's like a small little intersection there where we had something kind of nice before they ruined it.
Yeah. That played out everywhere. And the system collapsed in the early 2000s. It turned out the system they were using wasn't really financially stable because most of the film screenings couldn't come close to filling the room. So the revenue wasn't actually covering the costs associated with maintaining this gigantic complex. And most of the theater chains in the US went bankrupt in the early 2000s. And the few that remained kind of consolidated. And yeah, most of those multiplexes are still standing, but as I think Sean was kind of alluding to, they don't use that strategy anymore. They don't use all their screens to show like 14 different movies at the same time.
The same movie on every screen.
I'm just going to look
10 minutes apart.
How many screens I could choose to see Batman on at Polo Park.
Batman at 7, at 7.
You have a 16-screen movie theater. Now 10 of those screens are showing Batman.
Yeah.
So the good part about that is if you watch Batman and you have to pee, and you're in theater 1, and you missed 5 minutes of the movie, go to theater 3 and you know it's 10 minutes back.
So while it lasted, during peak multiplex, the conditions allowed for something unusual and original like the Blair Witch Project to find an audience and spread in popularity and spread on a different number of screens, even just through word of mouth. So after it opened in 27 theaters, 4 weeks later, the Blair Witch had expanded to over 2,000 theaters and was on its way to becoming a massive smash hit. And the success, it wasn't just word of mouth or unprovoked word of mouth. There was quite a lot of buzz leading up to Blair Witch.
Didn't they put a lot of misinformation on what the internet was at that point? And
it was the website for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm curious what you guys remember from the run-up to the Blair Witch Project coming out.
I remember being on early internet, chat room, maybe early BBS message boards, hearing about it through those kind of, proto-social network things, and then checking out the website that was set up for it. And then from there, it was playing at the local suburban, St. Vital Theater by that time. Don't remember the website terribly well, or I didn't until you found the archived one. But I remember that being checking that website and being oh, this is
I remember
cool.
the website a little bit. We didn't have internet at home, me at that point, but I remember sometimes my dad would let me use his internet at his work, and I'd go into his office, and I definitely remember going to blairwitch.com because everybody was talking about this in the schoolyard in my experience. I would have just turned 13 around then.
Yeah.
And it was just such a big topic of conversation.
Did they spend money on promotion? Who was in charge of that? Because whoever did that made this movie what it is.
So Artisan Entertainment was the studio that was not one of the major studios, but they're one of the bigger little studios, if that makes sense, a major minor studio. They definitely saved money by making what some people would call the first successful viral marketing campaign for a movie.
Totally.
They also had word of mouth too. Internet isn't what it is today. For those people listening who weren't born in the 90s or 80s.
Gross.
What I remember of it, I remember reading articles about it, thinking it might be real.
There was so much speculation.
Yeah, it just says so these people went in the woods and they filmed their journey or whatever. And this is what happened.
In the website, it shows you images of their car as it was supposedly found in 1994.
Right.
It had images of the people. And also they presented them as missing persons. At advanced screenings of the movie, they would hand out these little flyers that were saying if you have any information about these people, please call this number.
That's fucking gold.
Artisan executives obviously took control of the marketing machine when it was their movie, but they were clearly taking cues directly from Sanchez and Myrick, because Sanchez and Myrick had been going with this strategy from the beginning, like I mentioned. Even when they're seeking for investors, they were already on the strategy of pretending it was real.
Yeah, that's what, like, coming back to that, when I say, or what I want out of the gimmick is like that logical consistency. Is this one does that so well on all fronts, like the movie itself, and then in all the, at least the early marketing at the time, really strives for the verisimilitude. Right?
Yeah, and they made a fake documentary about like the Blair Witch phenomenon, the supposed myth of the Blair Witch, which is a myth they totally made up. Myrick and Sanchez made this up out of whole cloth, but they convinced so many people that there was this pre-existing myth, and they made that documentary themselves. I remember watching that at a friend's place, so at the run-up to the movie.
I've never seen that.
I think they aired it on the Sci-Fi Channel in the run-up to the movie, but it was like all about the real myth of the Blair Witch, not about the movie. So it was a really sneaky bit of marketing.
Fuck, cool. So good.
Also, they put just a short 40-second trailer before The Phantom Menace, which just had like the intro bit of the text that you see at the start of the movie. You know, these people went missing. This is their footage. Then some shots of like trees and stuff that just says BlairWitch.com.
Not even the famous close-up. I remember a trailer with that in there.
Yeah, I think they have that too. Yeah. So yeah, speculation was running rampant. You know, is it a documentary? Is the legend real? It did become a phenomenon. I assume everybody knows what the Blair Witch is, but I shouldn't assume that. It's three people who go out in the woods trying to make a documentary about this supposed myth, the Blair Witch, and get lost. That's what's going on.
If you don't know what it is, that's why they didn't remake it. They made a sequel in 2015, 16?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
The point is, if you haven't seen the original,
you haven't seen the new Blair Witch?
Yep.
It's good right up until the end where they show the Blair Witch. Like, they show exactly what it is.
Classic mistake.
Yeah, which is exactly what the original movie didn't do.
The whole reason that movie is memorable.
Yeah, and the thing is, when Artisan bought the movie, they wanted a new ending, and they actually sent Sanchez and Myrick into the woods, and they shot...
The ending is the best part. Like, that's the greatest part of this movie.
Yes, but
when the movie fucking ended, you left with your chest, like, tight. Like, holy fuck.
I'm going to want to circle back to this when we talk about Paranormal Activity.
Absolutely.
Because I think we have two sides of I
just got goosebumps.
And so do I. But like what I wanted to just make clear is that they didn't use the new endings that were shot, because they did shoot 4 alternate endings. And then after they like screened the movie with the 4 alternate endings, they tried to test it. They came back to what Sanchez and Myrick had been saying, which is that the way it was originally shot was correct, so that we actually, thankfully, got the unmolested original movie, the same one that was screened at Sundance, released in theaters.
Awesome.
And yeah, I know what you're talking about, Chad. We'll put a pin on that and circle back to it in a little bit. Yeah, it was a phenomenon when it came out. The reports about it being such like a shocking movie fueled that. I'm sure you remember there being reports about people throwing up in the aisles in the movie, which is very reminiscent to the hysteria around The Exorcist.
I've thrown up in a movie before too, but I was just hungover.
Yeah, maybe all those people were hungover too. It became a bit of a media hysteria thing.
You film one person puking in the theater and it's like, oh my god, look at this. This movie's so scary. It's like, no, we're watching fucking Top Gun 3D. I got confused and I drank.
And you're like, will you stop filming me every time this happens? God.
Please stop.
I remember Blair Witch there are 2 movies I can think of being in the theater and having like I want to avert my eyes fear reaction. And I feel like one of them was Blair Witch, but I don't remember the moment. And the other one, which is super embarrassing, was in Signs when the alien turns and looks at the camera.
Oh my god, that's so good. See, that little bit of found footage in Signs is amazing.
Yeah, that's freaking me out.
Awesome movie. Which kind of similar to Alien Abduction.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
The ending was dumb, but that's how that director does things. I also didn't watch Old because I'm sure...
Oh, right. I didn't see Old either. Fuck.
Kind of wanted to watch that movie, but I just haven't yet.
You should. It's good. But in terms of the Blair Witch,
no, I won't.
Huge runaway success, over $200 million, broke the top 10 most successful movies in America that year. And that was a year with a lot of very successful movies. This is the year of The Phantom Menace. And
Bigelow.
The Sixth Sense was also a massive sensation. Austin Powers 2 was huge as well. And internationally, too, it did really well. In Italy, it set a record for the biggest opening weekend for an American movie ever. So it wasn't just an American phenomenon. It was all over.
Yeah, right? They would just be like, holy fuck, USA is scary.
Maybe Italians would be like, I'm never fucking going to the US. There's witches around in every forest.
Don't go to the woods. When you go to USA, just stay in your hotel. Do not go to the woods.
I'm kind of touching on that. I find it really noticeable how Heather says in the movie, It's very hard to get lost in America these days. And then she doubles down later on where she insists it's impossible to get lost in America now. And I find that really, it's a weird statement because of course you could get lost in America. Like there's still tons of wild spaces everywhere. It's clearly not true.
How the fuck do you think we haven't found Bigfoot yet? Because it's huge.
Well, that's one explanation. I can think of another, but
don't say it.
Don't worry.
You piece of shit.
I've already popped the bubble on alien.
Did you not watch In Search
of?
That too. You watch In Search of. They've almost found him. Almost.
So the fact that like Heather keeps insistently doubling down on that weird and not true bad take, I think is really telling us something about her and about the movie. And I think America sees itself as a country where wilderness no longer exists, because at this point it's kind of seeing itself as a place where like reality, the real zones don't exist. Everything's just part of a map. Nothing's actually there in a fundamental way, like wilderness is there. I mean, reality and something that's not interpreted, that's not explained away, like the desert of the real in Baudrillard.
Yeah. Or in The Matrix.
Or The Matrix. Yeah. Welcome to the desert of the real in the same year. Coming into contact with the real in a country where it's believed to not exist is, I think, kind of the true horror of the Blair Witch Project. Like the trauma of being brought into direct communion with the loamy layer of reality on the forest floor, beneath all the media, all the interpretation that our postmodernism addled brains have been tricked and anesthetized into thinking is all there is. Like Heather definitely has like advanced 90s brain.
Yeah, there's that whole scene with her and Josh. Josh is looking through her camera, right? He's explaining how he sees what she likes about filming all the time, and that whole filtered reality bit.
I see why you like this video camera so much.
You do?
It's not quite reality.
Reality says we gotta move.
No, but it's totally like a filtered reality, man. It's like you can pretend everything's not quite the way it is.
Yeah. And she also says at one point, like, this is all I have, referring to the camera. I think Heather has internalized postmodernism in that 90s way to the point where in a crisis, she clings to the camera like a security blanket. And when this like real thing breaks through her camera's viewfinder, that's traumatic. And I think that's what all found footage movies are trying to do in a way, but Blair Witch did it best. It's showing us how the screen, which we use to comfortingly mediate reality, could actually capture a glimpse of this traumatizing true reality. Traumatizing because it's uninterpreted and it doesn't care about you or your perspective. It's irreconcilable with how you think or live.
When we go back to like what me and Sean said about the rules, our rules of found footage, this one fucking kills it in every regard.
Yeah.
There's no CGI, and we know why the woman or man or whoever is filming, we know why they're filming. And the acting it seemed real.
It works really well as a real document for me. And like you mentioned, Sheldon, the fact that there's no CGI, there's no nothing. We see nothing.
No, and that's the best part.
Some rocks on the ground.
I think the restraint of Myrick and Sanchez and Blair Witch is so admirable to make a movie that's so bare bones. And not only do you see nothing of significance, we get no real explanation at all.
Nothing, yeah. It's amazing.
And there's almost no real theorizing or interpretation that's happening on camera. Like sometimes the best gift a filmmaker can give their audience is just less. Just provide less and let the imagination do more. The less stuff there is cluttering the screen, the more room there is for the viewer to enter it.
We should have just done an entire podcast on Blair Witch.
I kind of wanted to. Blair Witch slaps so hard. Like I fucking love this movie.
It's so good. It's fucking
rewatching
amazing.
it after several years of not seeing it, I was like, holy shit, this is good.
I thought when I rewatched, I was like, maybe it doesn't hold up as well, but it like far and away, I think the best of these movies.
Yeah, well, of course. This one I saw multiple times in the theater.
Nice.
I saw it more than once in the same week. Like I remember going on a Friday night when it opened, when the movie came out.
I just did that with Jackass this year.
The same thing, right? The jokes in Jackass, you can watch and laugh at them over and over and over again. And the scares in Blair Witch, in a dark theater where the surround system is there.
It stays tense, like on repeated viewing.
It's not the same as watching at home.
I'm jealous. I've never seen it in theater. I'd love to. I was a little too young at the time. It was an R-rated movie.
I was the same age as you.
I went with my older sister, I remember.
Turned 13. Oh, you went to see it in theaters too, Sean?
Wait, you're 13 now? You just turned 13?
Now, yeah, exactly.
I should stop taking pictures of my dick. That is going to get me in a lot of trouble. Or Dylan's 13, everyone. So
No, I mean, I definitely rented it as soon as it came out on video because I was obsessed with like everybody talking about it and stuff, but I wasn't able to go, unfortunately.
I was curious about the sequel. You guys have all seen it, right?
I just saw the sequel for the first time.
Like the sequel from a couple years after the original.
The Book of Shadows.
Yeah, I'm talking about Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, which came out in 2000.
I haven't seen that in 20 years or more than 20 years.
Like, I watched that more recently than I rewatched the original just to see. It got so much hate. So much hate. So I rewatched it just to see what it was like. And I don't know. I enjoyed it. It's not bad.
I could see finding things to like about it. It was kind of doomed to fail in that environment.
It has really bad acting.
And the thing is, that's apparently why Myrick and Sanchez didn't want to do a sequel right away. Naturally, when it became a smash hit, Artisan approached Myrick and Sanchez about doing a sequel, and they didn't shut down the idea. Like, they were okay with the idea. They just didn't want to do it right away. They wanted to wait for like the media frenzy to calm down before revisiting it, if they did revisit it. But that didn't happen. Artisan was so eager to cash in, understandably, is that you got like a small studio that has this golden calf drop into their lap. Of course, they want to get every penny out of it they can. So unfortunately, that meant making a sequel without the consent of Sanchez and Myrick.
If they said, we want a sequel now, and they said no, and they said, but we need one,
well,
and the directors had the rights to the movie, right?
No.
Like a negotiation thing where they're like, Blair Witch 2 has to come out now. And they said no.
And then Artisan can say, cool, we own the rights. We'll just make it with somebody else, right? Which is what they did. Because Artisan bought the rights to it, right? That's the thing about like the Sundance independent mill, is that like when the studio buys the project, they own all the rights to the project. Obviously, there's a huge rush to capitalize on what was a huge sensation. In 2000 also saw the release of like multiple Blair Witch parodies, including Da Hip Hop Witch with Eminem and Ja Rule.
One of the worst movies I've ever seen. I'm going to have a fucking PTSD flashback about Da Hip Hop Witch.
Okay, well, have you seen The Bogus Witch Project with Pauly Shore, which came out around the same time?
No, but I do have a soft spot for Pauly Shore.
Okay, there was also something called the Tony Blair Witch Project. I'm not sure what that is.
Sure, yeah.
No!
And that's to say nothing of porn parodies like the Bear Wench Project.
So, here's what I'm saying right now. I've watched the Bear Wench Project recently.
You're fucking with me.
Is that why your
I'm
name
not.
on
Really?
Zencaster is Wench?
That's why I made that. Why do you think I made my name Wench? Because I was going to bring it up.
Are the porn parodies found footage?
Yes. Yeah. There's no sex. Like, there's no...
That sounds very genre breaking.
It's just basically, there's sorority girls. I don't know why we're talking about this, but they go into,
you're the one who leaped on it.
No, I want to get
you
it in
set your
before
name to remind yourself to talk about it.
I recently came across the DVD of A Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, because it's in the place where I'm staying, and I found it like funny and depressing, just like how ridiculously mercenary it was. Like, they had this whole, like, I don't know what's the normal amount of like things for sale to have in a DVD released like in the year 2000, but this one had an entire mail-in catalog, like 12 pages of like coupons and offers that were like, buy the Blair Witch book series, the Blair Witch video game series, Blair Witch hats, Blair Witch mugs, Blair Witch candles, and blankets and necklaces. There was a series of like VHS movies that were supposed to like expand on the mythology. Like, they were trying so hard to milk this as much as possible. And Sheldon, you were saying too, didn't you see Book of Shadows in theaters, and they were like kept trying to sell you stuff or something?
I remember this distinctly. In the theaters, when Book of Shadows came out, there was huge cutouts, like posters. All the Blair Witch little twig things were hung all over the place, everywhere.
That's kind of cute.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, no, it was insane.
As recently as 2019, there was still at least one tour company that was doing Blair Witch tours in the woods of Maryland.
Wow.
It doesn't seem that, as far as I can tell, that any of them have survived the pandemic, but still, like 20 years later, that little tiny town of Burkittsville has been harassed by tourists for years and years.
Like tourist groups as in like, hey, here's some neat stuff about how they shot this movie and where, or tourist groups like, come see the local legend of the Blair Witch that totally exists.
Maybe a little bit of both, but like going out to the shooting locations.
Cool.
Like going out to the woods and be like, they shot this here, and they camp overnight. And I get the impression that'd be kind of the thing, like, who knows what might happen overnight?
Right.
I don't know. So at the time the movie came out, The movie itself felt like it was just one part of the phenomenon that was the Blair Witch Project, along with the pre-release hype and the post-release sensation. Now I think we can actually extricate the movie itself from the phenomenon. And I think it's time we talked about Blair Witch, not just as like an event, as an important film, but as a great film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It took several years, I guess, before the found footage horror movies really started heating up again. Let's talk about something else. Let's go.
So we're going to go on to rec or record, rendered as the abbreviated form on a camera, which is a Spanish movie from 2007. So like several years after the big boom of the first couple here.
Yeah, and it's not like there weren't found footage films in the intervening years, but I feel like
not a
the
lot
next
of
boom took a while. Not a lot of remarkable ones that had a lot of success.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all picked what we thought was the main.
Yeah,
big
the more
ones in
important or
these.
significant ones, I guess.
And so, like, Rex stands out partially because it was the inspiration or source material for an American remake called Quarantine, but also because I think it's like a pretty decent little found footage. It's just like a reporter in, I can't remember if they mentioned what city, but they're in Spain.
Yeah, I think it's Barcelona.
Okay. A reporter and a camera operator who do just a show about like what people do at night, go to follow a fire crew around just to see what that's about. And they get a call to a building and they get involved in these hijinks. So it's like a very, very brief and small movie. I don't even think it cracks like 80 minutes. And it's all the single camera from the news reporting team, and a bunch of scary shit happens in the building. It sort of sits at the intersection between like that 2000s zombie revival era thing and a little bit of maybe religious horror. There is sort of an explanation scene they tack on the end, which I think does it a disservice by trying to like make it a bit too neat. But like for the most of the movie, I really like that. I think it's paced pretty well. I think it's pretty tense. As Sheldon was saying, you don't even really need the subtitles to follow all the important stuff. Like I liked the movie. I had a really good time with it. I do think it falls a little bit short on that point I made about like how did we come to get this footage?
Oh, I thought it worked well there. Like one of our main rules was like, why the fuck are they filming?
Yeah, the why they're filming makes perfect sense because that's their job, right? And there's all these things where the reporter, I think her name is like Angela, it's like keep filming, and they do the thing where the cop or someone's like, hey, you got to stop, but they really keep going. That all is fine. And you could easily just say like, oh, the government went in there after and got it. But the scene at the end, they want to make it like viscerally very tense, and they kind of like, just like you're talking about the Blair Witch sequel, I think they show a bit too much at the end.
I'm just trying to remember how it ended.
Yeah, so like basically there's a virus that's spreading through the people who live in the small apartment building that's kind of like zombie-ish. They don't say that, but it makes you hyper violent, and you know they appear to die and come back and they want to bite people. But at the end, they go up to this apartment that's been established someone else owns but isn't there for a long time. And there's all this stuff in there about this girl who was possessed in Portugal years before, and a very convenient tape recorder that rewinds exactly to the point you need it to for the plot, which we always love to see.
There's a bunch of sequels, right? Is there a prequel to this movie or no?
Well, there were 3 sequels, which I did not watch. I don't know if they did the Paranormal Activity treatment, where the third one is the prequel. I don't know, if this got a whole lore around it. But yeah, they're like trying to mix the like demon exorcism thing in with the idea of like zombie virus. I just would have enjoyed the movie more if it was like Blair Witch, kind of that vague and having a little bit more restraint. But I think functions really well.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I find it really fun and really kinetic. You know, the way that they have it all set in one building and you got to go from one floor to the next, one apartment to the next.
It's like a very well executed bottle movie. Like this movie would have like rivaled, well, maybe been like just underneath Blair Witch for me if it was giving me a little bit less on the ending.
It's a super fun movie. Like just all
really
the time
fun,
they spent on hallways and like staircases and stuff.
Yeah, and really good practical effects. Because a lot of these are very low. This one has a bit of a bigger budget. I think it goes about $2 million.
There's the rule. Practical effects, not fucking like, CGI bullshit.
There's a thing where someone bites a firefighter, right? And you get that great stringy, meaty pull away from the neck. It just looks so gross. It's not a super gory movie, but those little moments of it are used quite well. And I think Dylan is saying very kinetic, like, a lot of up and down with great motion through everything.
I'm gonna have to watch Quarantine soon because I do own Quarantine.
Yeah, I have seen Quarantine, but I don't really remember it very well. As far as I recall, I think it's like a pretty faithful remake. Maybe just like zhuzhed up, like the Ring and Ringu.
Yeah, I was about to say the Ringu and Ring.
Yeah, not a lot of changes. Just make it look more like American, or make it look more blue or green, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
There's like a real shift in 07 between what's happening in these found footage movies.
Basically, since the Blair Witch, I've seen like what came out after that? A whole bunch, but like early 2000s, there must have been.
I don't recall a lot
In terms
from
of
the
what's
aughts.
notable from the early 2000s, yeah, there's like maybe the Poughkeepsie tapes.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Maybe like that one with Werner Herzog, the Loch Ness movie. But that's like a little more of a different thing, I guess. But that was found footage technique. There weren't many significant movies that were like actually penetrating the
nothing that
mainstream theaters.
Everybody heard of, like Blair Witch.
Do you want to introduce like Mungo to us, Sheldon?
All right, let me open a beer for this one.
Forsters. Okay, I'm gonna stop doing that.
Nah, keep doing it.
Like Mungo, so leave me alone.
So yeah, obviously it's Australian. This is, I don't know, this is a shitty ghost story about a family who loses their daughter, and they film supernatural events. Like, this movie sucked.
Really?
Okay. From the amount of times I've seen articles about Lake Mungo, Mungi, how do you guys say it?
Mungo.
Mungo?
Or in Mungo.
Like the best movie you've never seen, the greatest found footage movie ever, and this and that.
I don't know about that.
You've never seen these articles?
I had never heard of this until it came up just in talking about what movies to watch.
Yeah, I will say that I also was made aware of it pretty recently because this is a movie that has like a reputation that's grown in the past few years, it seems. Like,
Yeah.
it really only had festival screenings. It never had a proper theatrical release. Like, it was first screened in Australia in 2008 and like played a few different festivals and then went to DVD. But it seems like its reputation has kind of grown in recent years.
Going into it with the hype and then still watching it, like, it just... Did you guys like this movie or no?
I did, personally.
Yeah, I thought it was a nice time.
Oh.
I think it's like more... Well, it didn't really function as like a found footage horror movie to me. It's more like a little, like a story about this family.
Yeah, it's the least found footagey of the ones we're talking about, for sure. Like, there's just elements of found footage in it.
Well, I apologize for bringing it up.
I would have done it anyways, because this was one that's been on my radar recently, so I wanted to include it.
You could do these little like how do you do the found footage? And there's like, oh, we just found this pile of stuff in the woods or whatever. And this one's like a documentary because it's just presented as like a documentary and maybe like something to pull your heartstrings on a local TV news special. Where it's just about like, you know, the family and the impact that this tragedy had. And I think it works like that for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it depends how you approach it. Like, it's possible that we're just shoehorning this into the found footage genre too much. Like, this may be the eaten alive of this episode.
When I watched this movie, I assume we all hated it.
Not me, but like, I think it shows how like found footage techniques and ideas are being incorporated by different filmmakers for different uses. Like, this is not a movie that's like, I'm going to do the next Blair Witch. The filmmaker, Joel Anderson, who wrote and directed a debut film, is using some of these techniques for a totally different end. Like, it's a movie about grief and death, really. Like, it's about the grieving family, and it's about like coming into contact with death and what that does to a person, I think.
Watching the first half of the movie, or maybe first third of it, I was actively enjoying it, where the daughter shows up in these photos or videos or whatever. And then they just kind of ruin it by saying it's all a hoax.
But I like that because they keep like introducing, then retracting the possibility of a supernatural element.
Yeah.
You know, they keep being like, there's a spooky thing happening. Actually, no, maybe there is. They're kind of toying with you. And I feel like maybe in a way that's kind of mimicking the stages that somebody's going through when they're grieving and being like...
They say, no, this is all fake. He made it up. However, in these fakes, there is some sort of supernatural...
Yeah, exactly. There's layers. Yeah.
Maybe I have to rewatch it. You guys are bringing me around. Actually, in my own head, I'm bringing myself around. Like, maybe I don't hate it. This actually sounds really...
When we finally actually get to like a found footage horror moment, which is when they finally find the crucial piece of evidence, the climax, which is the cell phone that the dead girl Alice has buried, I thought that moment hit hard. Like, that scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
It's a different thing. It's different than everything else we're talking about. But
Yeah.
I found it really interesting myself.
Okay.
We did folk horror last episode, and I was surprised to see this movie come up in Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, the documentary on folk horror. The filmmaker Kayla Janess does like an excursion into Australian folk horror because she's taking kind of a global view, and she presents Lake Mungo as folk horror, surprisingly. And her reasoning is that Australian landscapes like Lake Mungo, which has had some very important archaeological evidence found there, even though there's no actual like Australian Aboriginals in the film, she argues that this landscape is kind of haunted by their absence and by like the legacy of like the genocidal murder of the Aboriginals, that just by having the landscape itself in the movie, the kind of residual grief of a population is being introduced in the film. But it was really interesting the way that she talks about the Australian outback itself as being haunted by grief, and movies like Lake Mungo and Picnic at Hanging Rock, which don't include any Aboriginals, might have like the specter of their absence is part of the material in some way.
Picnic at Hanging Rock fucking rules.
Oh, it kicks ass, yeah.
Have you guys seen Wolf Creek?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. She brings that up too, actually, in the documentary. I like Wolf Creek a lot.
I feel like that was on the back of like Hostel and that sort of extreme
like
torture-y slashers.
What do you call that?
The torture porn.
Yeah.
Torture porn, yeah. Speaking of torture porn, let's go into Cloverfield.
Not quite yet. We have one more stop before we're at our terminus.
Jesus Christ.
Before we continue, it's time for a wee thought-provoking interlude. The way Lake Mungo incorporates both found footage and ghost photography got me thinking about what we could learn by comparing and connecting these two spooky ways of using cameras. So I called on a specialist. I'm speaking with Professor Margarida Medeiros, head of the Department of Communication Sciences at the Nova Faculty of Social and Human Sciences, Lisbon, in Portugal, author of several books on photography and an expert on Victorian spirit photography. So just to start off with, to give a little bit of background, what is spirit photography? What's the history of that?
Well, spirit photography begins very, very early in 1863 in Boston with somebody that by chance made a kind of ghostly photograph and showed it to a friend. He was an engraver and he was learning how to do photography and used an already used plate, and it came a kind of transparent double behind. So, and somebody told him, because spiritualism had begun in 1844 with the Fox sisters in Worcester. His friend told him, well, it seems like a photograph of a spirit. And after the friend sent the picture to an editor of a spiritualist journal in New York, the next day the photograph was published. And the same day he had a queue in his studio of engraver of lots of people that wanted to have also a spirit photography of somebody already deceased. He says in this testimony later that it just happened to him. It was not a fake. He began to do photographs and the spirits appear in the photographs. You know, it was not very easy for the spiritualist movement, mainly in the more literate circles like scientists and others that were also embracing spiritualism. Lots of very important people in philosophy and science, and they didn't like really very much the spirit photography because they thought that it could discredit the movement. But I think the photographers were very, very clever and always achieved to convince everybody that really spirits appear during the session. You know, it's very connected with the essence of photography, because photography is made in a camera oscura. It's a technology that at the time was only new by rich people that have the money to buy the equipment. And at that time, it was a matter of a profession. Photography was rather mysterious technology. It's like a black box. So it was very easy to convince people that something very supernatural had happened during the session. Because photography was seen as a politic tool, a tool of proof. This is true because it is photography.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So what is this history in the, I guess, debate around ghostly images in photographs? What does this tell us about the discourse around scientific rationalism versus things that are maybe esoteric or unobservable?
Well, this is one of the most fascinating things in the crossing of spiritualism, philosophy, and photography, because for some of the experts, like William Crookes, that was the scientist to discover the cathodic rays, the rays that allowed later television. He worked really in physics, and he used to say that spiritualism and physics is the same thing. And he invented a new concept that was entitled the psychic force that could be printed on a photograph, which is very interesting because science at the end of 19th century was becoming something very abstract, very far from the immediate experience. You cannot see electricity. You cannot see the cathodic rays, magnetism, electricity, waves of light, something that was not close to the senses. So it was a kind of common ground between those who wanted to state the supernatural and, on the other hand, the scientists for the hard science.
You've mentioned how photography was really being seen by a lot of people as kind of hard facts, like a medium that is almost not a medium, just straight reality. So, how does that line of thinking lead to the belief that maybe photographs can capture facts that are not otherwise observable or not rational?
Well, one of the statements that some of the writers on spirit photography wrote was that until now, photography could register what we see. But now we have an upgrade, and photography can register what we don't see. It was a kind of slogan. Although at the same time, photography was always a kind of magical tool, mainly because it always produced doubles. So there was always something creepy around photography, even if it was always sold as a documentary tool. This kind of document that at the same time is a double. As you know, double was a very big issue in literature from the beginning of the 19th century, mainly in Dostoevsky, Oscar Wilde, Hoffman, Guy de Maupassant. A lot of writers wrote on spirits, on doubles, in the sense of something creepy, something that is threatening you.
I mean, you've said that you can't really have spiritualist film in the same way because it isn't developed in secret. It's not coming from a black box. I'm sure that's true, but I wonder if maybe found footage films are kind of the closest to that because some movies like the Blair Witch Project try to pretend that they were never made, that they were found, that this is a record. Do you see any relationship between these unaesthetic movies that kind of try to exploit our trust in something that is made to look like a real document and the way that they evoke something uncanny and the spirit photography?
Yeah, and it is very interesting because documentary film festivals are now including films that are not just documentary. Of course, documentary are always a construction, and of course, but sometimes the films do that to create this sense of psychological instability and to put us in a position of believing the unbelievable. But the more creepy are not the movies about ghosts, and the most creepy are those that are supposed to be realistic or documentary. Filmmakers today they don't like to be labeled documentary or feature film, and I think it's because they want sometimes to use the documentary capacity of the camera as photography to speak about other kind of ghosts that are the memories of the family, the memories of the country, the post-memory of some events of the past. I think today documentary works a lot with the invisible, with the internal reality, which is mainly a ghostly reality. I mean, our thoughts, our memories, it's more close to psychoanalytical issues. But I can tell you that, for instance, one of the leaders of spiritualism in England, Frederick Myers, wrote lots of letters to Freud, telling him that they were working on the same things.
Thank you so much, Professor Medeiros. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's been really interesting.
One thing more, I'm always quoting that passage of the Camera Lucida of Barthes, when he says, photography is such a madness. It's mad in such a way that society tries to deny this madness mainly through two ways. The first way is transforming photography in art, because art is never mad. And the second way is to banalize it in such a way that nobody sees it.
Okay, now let's get back to the recording.
Yeah, Paranormal Activity, right?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
I think
That's your description
most
of the
people
movie.
are probably
Let's get into Paranormal Activity.
like people. It's obviously it's penetrated culture so much over the last decade and a half. I went into rewatching this with a measured amount of hope because I thought I'm probably going to be sympathetic to elements of it, and I had this idea in my head that there's a version of this movie that I thought could function. And then I watched it again, and I thought it was like just a big turd.
It's not good.
The performances are not good. If you haven't seen it, it's a young couple. They're living in a house. We kind of join the Paranormal Activity sort of in media res. Like the first scene explains that, oh, I got this camera because of all the creepy shit that's been happening. So, they take care of our little found footage boxes pretty well. And over the course of 80 minutes, that feels like a lot longer, a string lifts sheets in their house, doors close. They kind of ratchet up some unexplained stuff that gets caught in a lot of like static, I'm leaving a camera on overnight shots. Things get creepier and creepier. And we're going to go ahead and just do the spoiler on Paranormal Activity.
Yeah, who cares? Who the fuck cares? There's 7 of them.
The climax in this movie, Katie gets up and goes downstairs and disturbs Mika. He gets up, and there's like off camera, you hear all this shit happen downstairs because again, the camera's just positioned to watch them while they sleep. And then Katie comes up and like throws Mika's dead body at the camera, and then looks at the camera, and her face goes like all scary demon, right? And then it cuts to credits, and that brings us into a world of sequels. I think they made like 6 of these in about 8 or 9 years, and then a couple more in the past couple years. This is also around the time of the big like ghost hunting TV boom, right? I think there's a lot of
that's true
parallels there.
Oh, ghost hunters and.
But I think that I just did not like the movie at all.
It could have been a 20-minute long YouTube clip.
Yeah, you could condense it down. I think they're going for like a slow burn kind of feel, and there's like technically elements of the gimmick work fine. Like I think it's having that like static shot of the bed is not a bad way to like have some tension or like some, I don't know, dramatic irony about it. But yeah, kind of like slow and boring. And I think it suffers from the studio meddling in an ending. Because there's an original ending to, actually I think they shot a few, but the most famous like screened original ending involved, so we still have Mika going downstairs, you hear a bunch of shit, he gets killed, whatever. And then just Katie comes back upstairs, and I think she's holding a bloody knife, and just kind of stands there for a while. And it's like 2 days where they fast forward the footage to show you or something. And then a neighbor is worried, hasn't seen him, and like some cops come, and it like breaks Katie out of her catatonic state, and they have an altercation, and the police shoot her. And then the cops come and get the camera, and that's how we've recovered the footage.
Oh, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that ending would make the movie like super good, but I certainly think it would do it a big service. But it also, you can't make 5 more movies in another few years off of that, right? So I think like what was standing out to me the whole time I watched this movie is that it's like there's this, I think it's the same year as Rec, or right around like 2007. You have this shift right around that time of like maybe it's the end of that little estuary of the 90s to, this whatever end of history. But like everything around then, it just sort of like collapses into lore. Because that's around the same time we have like the Marvel Cinematic Universe starts and becomes the highest grossing franchise and all that. And I know this is a thing in horror. Historically, you make franchises, but just like really milking all you can from the creature to the point where the movies just suck.
Have you seen any of the sequels or no?
I have seen up to Paranormal Activity 4.
Are they better or worse? Or?
So I would say off the top of my head, Paranormal Activity 3 is worth a watch because it's a prequel. But again, my experience of going back and watching this and being like, oh, this is bad. Maybe 3 is like a total pile. I think the only thing 3 would have going for it is because it's set in like 89 or 90. You can have some fun gimmicky shit like that. 2 is awful. I think the gimmick in that one is they're more home security cams. 3 is prequel. And then in 4, you get to the high level gimmick stuff where if you ever do another decade of this, like the computer camera era found footage, right? Google Chat and FaceTime and all those.
I've watched the last one that came out last year.
I haven't seen that.
Good. Also, watching these movies like Paranormal Activity or whatever, it's better watching in theaters where the scares.
I think in a theater, this would be more tense. But I think, most of what stands out is this movie seems like a symptom of a way that movies come out now that I find that I don't enjoy.
I think I would enjoy this movie more had I seen it in a theater rather than...
Yeah, well, you're more engrossed in the theater, right? Like,
I'll say that my experience in watching it the first time and rewatching it, preparing for this, was a little flipped from yours. Like when I first watched it, I was like, this shit sucks. Like, why do people like this? Revisiting it this week, I felt a little more sympathetic to it. I'm still not a fan, and I think it's one of the weaker ones that we're talking about. But as like a movie about a relationship, about like these two people who just moved in together, and he's like, you didn't warn me about this stuff before I moved in because the demon's like following her or whatever, and he kind of holds that over her as kind of a chamber piece about a relationship. I think there's something there. I don't love it. The acting is not good.
Yeah, I think the performances, like you lose a lot of that in some pretty subpar acting.
The character development and, hearing their backstories or whatever, it works here because you kind of need it.
Mm-hmm. It's very it's one couple, it's their relationship. It's almost a chamber piece just on them and them living together. And if you want to look at the demon as like a metaphor for something that's going wrong with a relationship, it has something to recommend it there. And I enjoyed it more in that angle now than when I first watched it. This was like a movie that was originally made for peanuts.
Yeah, $15,000 for shooting.
Yeah, so it's a guy, Oren Peli, who is an Israeli who came to California at age 19 as a software designer, who decided to make a found footage movie. And it got screened at Screamfest in LA in 2007. And then it kind of started its slow trip towards when it finally came out as a big theatrical release in 2009. It was first came to the attention of Jason Blum when he was still like an executive with Miramax before he started the Blumhouse.
Jason Blum.
This is a bit of his origin story, how he became like the biggest horror producer today.
Yeah, because the return on this was like 1,000,000%, right?
Oh yeah, I mean it made almost $200 million.
Dylan, do you have a readout of the movies and then their production amounts?
Well, like I think I mentioned earlier, it kind of depends how you calculate the production amount. Paranormal Activity, like Sean mentioned, we're talking about $15,000 that he shot the original film. But Sean said they reshoot the ending. It was at least $200,000 just to add the new ending. So that's way more than it originally cost. With Blair Witch, also, the endings they shot, which they ended up not using, were still way more expensive than what the actual film cost to shoot. But obviously part of the appeal when found footage started blowing up around the time of Paranormal Activity, because this is the one that kind of
sparked it up again, right?
It sparked it up for sure. And just the return on investment was so tempting. Obviously, it's kind of like when we got the slasher boom too. Yeah. Like the return on investment on Halloween was what really started turning heads. Is a movie that was made for very little money that's suddenly huge. If you want to make the comparison with slashers, it's not 1-to-1, but the Blair Witch Project is maybe more like Psycho, like the one that's like the origin of them. Sure. But Paranormal is more like Halloween, like the one that everybody copied and that everybody started doing, like, and people for just more mercenary reasons were like, holy shit, you can spend like nothing on a movie and have it become a big hit. Let's try to do that. obviously didn't work for everyone, but Paranormal Activity, after like a couple of years, it was screened by Steven Spielberg at a certain point, and DreamWorks got involved, and it eventually became released by Paramount Pictures in September of 2009, and that's when it became a huge hit.
And it's Spielberg who has his fingerprints on the ending change.
Aesthetically, it's a little different from something like Blair Witch because the camera tends to be more static in this movie, right? There's a lot of camera on a tripod or sat on a counter or something. It's a lot more static.
Yeah. I think that works well for the tension. You have the people like freaking out, but you just have that very like locked down, almost like a Persimmon view, just cold,
Yeah, and then like maybe one of the most famous parts in it when you have the sped up footage of what happens at night and she's like standing over him in the bed. That's creepy, and as a kind of like spying in on something you're not supposed to see feel to it.
It's like Fincher.
I thought that was interesting. Like,
yeah. That's a cool aesthetic, which is something different from like the Blair Witch Project aesthetic. It's using found footage in a different way.
Yeah, I like how all of these do have a slightly different like approach to what kind of footage are we going to find or how's it going to be implemented.
That just made me think of something, actually. One thing that I like about found footage is that you have like audio perspective. Like some sounds are far and some sounds are near, and that's like part of the effect, which most movies just have visual perspective. If you have a wide shot of two people talking, then you switch to a close-up of them talking and you have the same audio. But found footage really incorporates like a far voice and a near voice. All right, should we move on to our last one?
I think so.
No, I'm good.
Save the best for last.
Yeah, so I wanted to have Cloverfield last because, the moment where like you have like a big budget studio, literally disaster movie being done in this technique, that it has arrived as a technique in like the Hollywood mainstream. So I thought that would be a good point to clip it off. So Cloverfield, 2008. In case you wanted to know what it would be like to experience 9/11, narrated by TJ Miller.
When did 9/11 happen? Oh, right, 9/11.
2001 is the part that's missing.
It happened on the 9th of November.
Directed by the Matt Reeves, which I've
never heard of her.
Matt Reeves has directed the 2 new Planet of the Apes movies and also The Batman. But the name that was associated with the movie when it came out was not Matt Reeves' name. This was his directorial debut. It was J.J. Abrams who was producing the movie.
Yeah, I thought he directed this before I turned it on to watch it.
It was definitely marketed as like a J.J. Abrams film, right?
Yeah.
Like his was the name that was associated with it in all the posters and trailers and stuff. Because at the time, 2008, like...
I don't think we knew who J.J. Abrams was.
No. In 2008, a lot of people were fucking gobbling on his dick. Like he was...
Yeah, the Star Trek, Lost was...
He didn't have Star Trek yet. Star Trek came the next year.
Oh.
And TV shows. He'd done Felicity. He'd done Alias. We're at peak Felicity. Lost right now. We're at like season 2 or 3 of Lost.
Okay.
And he had also made Mission Impossible 3.
Oh, yeah, right.
As director. But also at this point, like he had like a popular TED Talk and was like writing articles in Wired and shit about his like mystery box theory. Like I feel like he was getting a lot of press at this
what's
time.
the mystery box theory?
It's just his bullshit where he's like, make a mystery, make something mysterious and don't reveal it to the audience and they'll be interested in it. Which is
why didn't I think of that?
Exactly, right?
It worked though.
Hold something back from the audience, even if you don't know what you're holding back. It doesn't matter.
I'm picturing his TED Talk as the Brian Cox character in Adaptation. Like doing the screenwriting clinic.
I feel like that's not far off. Yeah, just even more smarmy, probably.
Sweet.
I think I'm enjoying this conversation about Cloverfield right now because I think Dylan hates it too.
Well, let's see.
And I think he hates that he hates it.
The movie was Abrams' idea. Apparently, Abrams, when visiting Japan with his family, he saw how his son was really into like kaiju toys, like Godzilla series toys, and was like, we should make an American giant monster movie.
Sure.
So he enlisted some close collaborators. The Matt Reeves is co-creator of Felicity.
Basically the perfect TV show.
I've never seen it. Is it good?
Never seen it.
It was written by Drew Goddard, who had written a lot of Alias and Lost. There was like a big viral marketing campaign for this one as well, kind of like in the Blair Witch mold, but not quite. It was a lot more like creating a series of like fake websites and stuff and like withholding what the movie was about. They would introduce like a fake soft drink company and then fans would go to the fake webpage for this. And if they like called the number, they would get like a message. And then eventually they'd get sent like a ringtone that's the monster's roar. And then unbeknownst to them, they would also get signed up for like a Paramount Pictures mailing list. So they'd get updates about like the Love Guru for the rest of their life and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Mariska Hargitay.
I think that was really on brand for J.J. Abrams at the time in terms of like synergy between like online and what's on the screen and stuff. You know, maybe inspired by the phenomenon of Blair Witch, but becoming a lot more like Silicon Valley corporate in terms of how it was executed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The movie itself is a giant monster movie that's done with the found footage aesthetic. That's what it is. I'm sure you probably know. And it really is just the found footage aesthetic in the sense that the movie is clearly very scripted, whereas pretty much all the other movies we're talking about use improvised dialogue. So it's really just like the shaky camera aesthetic that they've imported.
Yeah, you know what happens when a fucking monster that big comes to town? I drop the camera and I leave town.
No, you want to make a bunch of like Whedon-y quips.
Here's the thing. There's a million people filming it. No one's going to care about your little film.
They bring that up.
Drop the fucking camera, leave town.
I mean, obviously not everybody would drop the camera because not everybody dropped the camera on 9/11, and which is what the movie is extremely explicitly referencing.
That's what you're doing now? That's what we're doing.
What if Zapruder dropped the camera?
Okay, but like it would have been very, very obvious to everybody watching this movie in 2009 that it's making clear 9/11 references.
Oh, yeah.
With like the tsunami of dust pouring between the buildings. People like dazed people staggering around caked in gray dust in New York City. It takes place in New York City, of course. It's very, very clearly riffing off of 9/11 footage. The handheld footage that we saw on the news and stuff in the aftermath. It's not that much longer after us. Like if you listen to our kaiju episode, David Annandale, who was on that episode, made the point that I hadn't thought of before, where like we're talking about how unimaginable it would be to be a Japanese audience watching Godzilla in 1954, like 9 years after the atomic bombs dropped, where it's clearly referencing what happened. And he was like, well, the closest thing we'd have to, it's not the same thing, but the closest would be seeing Cloverfield, which was about the same amount of time later after 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
To what ends, I think, is like really what there is to debate about Cloverfield. Like, why is it doing that? Why do we have this movie, which in other ways is very much a B movie? Like I already mentioned, the dialogue is very scripted and not very good. The acting is not great. The cast, everybody looks like a modeling agency, neat and clean and pretty, to the point where I was like really glad when one of the two sandy-haired characters died. I couldn't tell them apart.
Good Lord.
Which one is in love with which one?
Like, we don't need these. We don't need these plots. We don't need these subplots. I don't care.
But what's so like strange and interesting about the movie to me is that the contrast between how B-movie it is, how constructed and phony it is, and then having these very direct reconstructions of moments from 9/11 at the same time. Like, what's going on here?
I never thought about that, about 9/11.
Did you see it when it came out?
9/11? Yeah, I was watching 9/11. I was watching Price is Right, and all of a sudden Price is Right switched to 9/11.
I didn't see Cloverfield until now, like until we watched it for this.
Oh, you never seen it before?
No,
okay. This is my first time revisiting since, but I saw it in theaters. And in theaters, you would not have said what you just said, Sheldon. Like, you know, it was still recent enough. Like, yeah, it's been 7 years, but it still felt recent enough that nobody would have mistaken, I think, that riffing on 9/11.
You shouldn't riff on that. Like,
well, that's what a lot of people said. Yeah. A lot of people said that at the time, right?
Was this movie very successful?
It was quite successful. Oh, yeah. Box office of about 170 million. Ooh. Yeah, it did quite good. I mean, the budget was big. This was the one big budget movie we're talking about. It cost about 25 million to make.
This whole movie's too big. Too big.
I think it made the big bucks because of not showing exactly what the movie was in the trailers or YouTube or whatever. Right? Yeah. They didn't show exactly what this movie was going to be about until you had to see it.
Yep. I remember the marketing campaign when it came out. And
Am I right?
And it definitely, I think it worked. It's fair to say the marketing campaign worked. They got people interested. The Statue of Liberty has been decapitated. By what? Why?
Oh, that was the big one. Yeah.
Yeah, they really played up the Statue of Liberty has been decapitated, but you don't know what happened.
Mm-hmm. It could be in like a war movie or whatever. We didn't know going into it.
Yeah. So it's like, is this movie just like very cheaply and crassly incorporating recent events and like digesting them as pop culture, as B-movie, making them just easier to pass through and just like as easy cheap sensationalism? Maybe the most interesting way to look at it is that it was like smuggling in a sharp bit of real trauma within a smooth, shiny surface. Like this was a razor blade inside a candy apple being handed out at Halloween.
You can make 9/11 movies. Like 9/11 movies came out and they were, fine. There's the Nicolas Cage one. There was
that was all right. The Oliver Stone movie.
They showed the events of 9/11. This one, if what you're saying is true, we're like, oh fuck, 9/11 happened. Let's try and make a monster movie about 9/11 and do this bullshit. It makes a sour feeling in my tummy.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's the bush. I don't know.
A lot of people reacted to it that way. Manola Dargis in the New York Times, like she said that it was, it was crass, it was disrespectful. She said something like,
there you go, yeah.
The movie would be insulting to survivors' memory, except the movie is so bad it is insulting to nothing but our own intelligence. Like,
I almost spit out my bush laughing at that.
Some people did not take kindly to this. Generally, the reviews were more positive than negative, but there definitely was a current where people were like, this is very crass, this is very disrespectful.
Well, I mean, they have a universe, right? They have 2 sequels.
But which aren't sequels, which are just unrelated movies that have the same word in the title.
I just found this movie so annoying.
The rules, me and Sean stated earlier, I don't know if Dylan follows his rules, but the CGI was awful.
I don't think it was
I will not say this anymore. If you're doing a found footage movie, it has to look real.
I don't think I mind like CGI so much as what I don't like about the way this movie looks is that pretty much all the other found footage are very like small movies, both like, literally like, 1 camera or 1 or 2 cameras, and small crews and small locations and little things and small stories. And this one is like really huge. It's like the whole movie is the little bit of found footage that you would put in the newscast of a monster movie. Like, oh, this disturbing footage was captured in Manhattan. Like, you know how in Cloverfield, TJ Miller has to film the TV in the store being looted to get that monster movie.
Who's TJ Miller?
He's the guy who played the guy with the camera.
This was actually his first role in a movie, but he's like comic relief in a whole bunch of movies.
Oh, I hated him so much in this.
I can't stand him in anything.
Awful.
In terms of like the techniques they use, I do like the thing they have where it's like what we're watching has been recorded over a tape of the couple who the moment of happiness they had, I guess, when they went to a trip of Coney Island, and every once in a while, if the tape has to be rewound or something, we get a little relic of that moment. That as like this like traumatic event kind of rewriting this little bit of happiness they had before is kind of a nice gimmick. I think it's a good idea and they work it in pretty well.
One little nitpick on that. The first time they rewind, especially when I think it's still at the party, I was just like, why would you fast forward back to the point where you had left off?
Yeah.
Of all this useless shit you just shot. It's good exposition for your movie, but like...
Yeah.
I have a bit of a nitpick on this movie as well. No one fucking cares about your subplot.
If you want 9/11 melodramatic romance, just go see Remember Me. It does it much better.
Yeah, I do have a bit of an issue that they have a hero arc where the guy gets to like save his girlfriend. That's more in the disaster movie tradition. Like disaster movies generally do that thing where it's about an event like splitting a family apart or splitting a couple apart, and then they have to reunite in face of the disaster. Like disaster movies tend to be very much, I think of them as kind of like more reactionary in the sense that it's always like the world is being ripped apart, but we have to pull the family together, pull the couple together. So they're kind of doing the disaster movie thing by having the arc where the guy has to, reunite with the woman he's supposed to be with by saving her. I don't love that.
It's terrible. It's a terrible plot.
I do kind of like how it ends with like them holding the cameras up to their face and like being like, this is the record of us, because it mimics the way that we start off with filming things, which is, he's doing like little testimonials from people because it's a going away. And at the end, once again, it's a going away and we have little testimonials. That little bit of symmetry is something I sort of enjoy.
Yeah, that's cute.
Do you like this movie?
I find it a really interesting movie. Do I like it? Not really. I think I've made clear. I think the dialogue and the acting is all like not good. I think it has some excitement
CGI
to it.
Is terrible. It's 2008. How is the CGI worse than it was in like 1995?
Because CGI kept getting worse, but I don't think it's terrible, the CGI.
So recently I played Duke Nukem 3D.
Nice.
They copy and pasted the same monster from Duke Nukem 3D and put it on the film.
It reminds me of an emaciated version of Orga from Godzilla 2000. In terms of like similarities to Japanese kaiju movies, it reminds me a lot of Gamera 2, Attack of Legion from like 96, I think that came out, or 97, which also has like the little versions of the critters. A better movie.
The little monsters who are climbing around look like the same exact monsters from Starship Troopers.
Yeah. As I think I already mentioned, the movie was very successful. Like with the Blair Witch Project, there was a lot of reports of people like throwing up in theaters and like theaters having to put up warnings for people going in that it could cause motion sickness.
Just from all the handheld and whip pen.
It does cause
motion.
Yeah. I've seen in person people throwing up during this movie.
Okay. Booze related or actually Cloverfield related?
One of our friends drank too much malt liquor.
Okay, I feel like they shouldn't really lay that charge at J.J. Abrams' doorstep.
Too much Mickey malt liquor, and that's what happens.
Yeah, that is what happens. I mean, they probably could have been seeing any movie.
No, because he saw Alvin and the Chipmunks, and he didn't throw up.
He didn't throw up?
No.
I threw up when I saw that movie. I released every fluid in my body when... No, that was the Squeakquel that had that reaction. Yeah, reaction to the movie was like a little bit all over the place. I was really surprised to learn that Cahiers du Cinéma, which is like, very venerable French film journal and like maybe the premier like art house film journal, they named Cloverfield their third best movie of the year for the year 2008.
What the fuck?
I really wanted to find like the review of the movie. I could not find it, unfortunately, because I really want to know why.
Who was 2 and 1 and who was 4?
Redacted was number 1 by Brian De Palma. Usually their movies are like French movies or like, they usually don't like American movies that much in Cahiers du Cinéma.
Oh.
But when they do like American movies, they tend to have like a sympathy for movies that deal with like war on terror, like Redacted, or like Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk was one they really celebrated. This past year, The Card Counter was a movie they celebrated too. So, I haven't been able to find that review. Unfortunately, I imagine it has something to do with the war on terror. You could also, I guess, see the movie as being just about the pervasive atmosphere of paranoia and being afraid of terrorist attacks all the time in the aftermath of 9/11. One totally different review was in The Village Voice, which is, of course, a New York independent weekly. There's a review by Nathan Lee, where the headline was, "Cloverfield is one giant, incredibly entertaining screw you to yuppie New York." Where he wrote, "Cloverfield enacts its deft simulation of that infamous September morning in order to brutalize the society that flourished from its ruin like some tacky, tenacious condo-dwelling fungus."
Wow.
Holy. Don't people go to movies to like escape reality? Like, isn't that a thing?
For
like,
some
I
people.
go to movies to escape reality.
Yeah, I mean, there's different approaches to going to the movie.
You go to escape reality. You don't want to see this
Not everybody.
bullshit.
I would rather be pushed deeper into reality when I see a movie.
Yeah, I think I want to see reality, like, reflected or shown in certain ways and give me something to think about.
After we talk about found footage, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, movies could do different things, but the movies we're talking about are trying to create a greater sense of reality.
A realistic...
And
yeah, I get it.
So it's interesting to see like this last one we're talking about. Did it find a way to do that that's even more like visceral and intense, or did it like cross a line and do something like inappropriate that takes us out of the movie and makes us feel like you're appropriating the real life found footage?
I think ultimately, in this case, I think it feels like a bit of a cheap way to get something disturbing into your monster movie.
Yeah, people will watch it and relate to it, I guess, is the thing.
Yeah, and relate to it in different ways, as we've seen from the different reviews. Like, some people related to it with disgust and like, why would you do that? Some people related to it like, awesome, let's see those fuckers die, like Nathan Lee did.
I get it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. Have we come up with any new realizations through our trip through these movies about why there might have been an enthusiasm for found footage horror movies in the 1998 to 2008 period?
When I was watching these, most of what I was thinking about was just like thinking about that like 98 to 08 as this transitional period in a lot of ways from like infancy of like internet culture into now. So I just kept watching the movies as sort of like reflections of how the cultural practice of making movies and franchises changes in that time. And I think I'm coming around quite a bit on your point, especially of like the 90s brain and the sort of overload of postmodernity and irony, and searching for something a little bit more concrete and sincere that then just sort of deteriorates or like decays through the 2000s until you end up with the big studio found footage monster movie.
I do think it's interesting how, for so many of these movies, as we've discussed, the context for them is inextricable from the internet.
Yeah.
These more than most movies seem to be something that was like riding on the wave of a rising internet culture.
That's why I think there's a different way to do these movies.
You could do like a TikTok or social media found footage thing that would probably be.
Yeah, I mean, there was
Might work,
like Host came out during the pandemic, which was a Zoom call found footage horror movie. I mean, like, found footage is definitely not a dead genre, and people are definitely coming up with new ways to incorporate smartphones and stuff. You know, another thing that we haven't really mentioned is the democratization of cameras and people having like handheld digital cameras, and then later on having iPhones with built-in cameras is something that happens that rises in parallel to these movies. So the way that we interact with a screen, like where back in the day, everything you see in a screen was mediated by a studio somewhere creating a presented product. We have a different relationship to it now when everybody has their own screens, everybody's making their own videos, and we see found footage appearing and changing in reaction to that in some ways.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we'll see a movie in this genre that's going to blow us away. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I think it'll happen. They're going to find a way, just like Blair Witch did.
Should we rank the movies we've discussed before we wrap things up? I mean, obviously, I've made it very clear that I think Blair Witch Project is the champ of this cohort and all found footage movies. I would probably put in Lake Mungo behind it, even though it's less found footage than the others. I think it's doing really interesting stuff. After that, I'm a little torn. I'll put in Wreck just ahead of Cloverfield, which are both movies that I find fun and interesting. And then like maybe Paranormal Activity after that, which I hated less than I thought I did when on rewatch. And then Alien Abduction, I feel bad about putting it last because I agree with you guys that there's like a lot of fun to be had.
Dylan.
It's an entertaining movie, but like it's the worst of the ones we've talked about.
Number one is obviously Blair Witch Project. The movie's fucking phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the unanimous.
It's amazing. It is the greatest found footage movie ever made. Number two would be Wreck. Actually, you know what? Number two is Alien Abduction. Blah, 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 whatever the fuck it's called. Number three is Wreck. Number four would be Paranormal Activity, probably. Number five would be Cloverfield. And then last is Mungo. You know what? Fuck it. Mungo's fifth, Cloverfield's last.
Nice.
All right.
There you go.
Okay, well, I'm Blair Witch first, obviously. No-brainer. I have Wreck second over Mungo third because I think that I liked Wreck more in the theme of like found footage horror movie.
Yeah, it's a super fun movie too.
Yeah, Mungo is like, I think, a nice family ghost story, but feels more like the kind of literary short story that's up for a prize where something bad happens in a small town and you're not really allowed to talk about it. And then I'll go Paranormal Activity fourth because there is a little bit of meat on there. Then Alien Abduction, and then Cloverfield. I don't think I need to have Cloverfield in my life anymore.
I kind of get it.
Just too many wisecracks in that kind of a movie too, and like
there's only one joke that made me laugh, and that's when TJ Miller is like, maybe it came from the sea, like it came from like a crevasse, and somebody looks at him and he goes, crevice.
Yeah.
I kind of laugh.
The girl he likes, right? I think Marlena looks back at him.
Yeah, the girl he likes, who is either like Zoe Deschanel or Mary Elizabeth Winstead.
I thought it was one of the
like
Deschanels.
Lizzie Kaplan or one of those.
I think it literally is Lizzie Kaplan, yeah.
Probably. All right. Well, thanks for listening. We're going to be back very soon with our 20th episode. We're going to have a video episode very soon.
Dylan, you're going to sit down with me in person. We're going to drink a whole bunch of Busch.
That's going to happen. So tune in if you want in on that. It'll be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Sheldon. This was really fun.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
It was. And thanks, Sean. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for inviting me to talk about this.
Stay tuned for our next episode, which should be coming out very soon. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it. All right. Well, have a good night. Keep looking behind you.
This program was the result of the work of scientists, researchers, and a group of highly skilled technicians.
Yeah, and then Artisan got in with their sequel right away, as we mentioned. But I just wanted to mention
Hold on, it wasn't done.
All right.
And there's the Blair Witch 2, The Book of Babes, which also came out the next year.
For real?
Yeah.
Oh, no way. Okay.
Wait.
They did the Blair Witch 3, The Faith, the Blair Witch. I don't remember the third or fourth or fifth sequel.
You're doing this by memory?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the sequel. There's the Book of Babes, and then there's a third one.
Okay. That's enough of that. I did.
So Julia survives the first Blair Witch Project. She's in.
Okay, fine.